and then Miss. With so many businesses in the community, especially Wisconsin Credit Union, who was very active in helping us provide that. It was covered by Channel 18, so we're going to go ahead and play that clip for you. We think. And sometimes when we cue these things up, they need to be refreshed. Yeah, take your time, Jim. One more try. We ran it earlier and it was just fine. Okay, well, we already sent the link to.
Called Mad City Money, annual event hosted by Wisconsin Credit Union. More than 240 juniors were given a career within salary, the number of children, if they have a spouse, and how much debt they have. All that information they were tasked with going through 9 different stations, housing with
Oh, that's okay. I think we just have so many devices on our hotspots in here. The board members already received the link. We'll also post it in next to the highlight on you. It's also on Facebook. It's on the internet. If you get a chance, just turn it off. If you get a chance, go ahead and watch it. It was a great activity. Thank you.
Next up, we have our student representative communications, and we've got our student council members here to share.
Good evening, members of the school board. Once again, we are grateful for the opportunity to share an update on recent and upcoming events within our school community.
SDCLA students attended the Fall Leadership Conference at UW Stout on Tuesday, October 29th. Their next event is Trunk Junk event sponsored by Children's Wisconsin. The event will take place on Wednesday, November 20th at 7:30 a.m. 10 students who responded to the email/Google form will bring their cars to the south parking lot where garbage cans will be available to clean the junk from their trunks and replace it with a free winter driving kit. SDCLA students will highlight the importance of preparing for the winter driving season ahead. The kits will include thermal blankets, ice scrapers, cables, flashlights, and much more.
MHS DECA, FBLA, and NHS completed their annual Trick or Can event. This entailed a canned food drive with the middle school and high school students going out on Halloween during trick-or-treating hours and collecting cans. This event did not disappoint, and in total, 1,921 items were collected and donated to Stepping Stones. This is about 500 more items than they collected last year. On October 28th, Stepping Stones posted that they would not be able to supply turkeys from the food pantry and were in need of staple foods to be donated for Thanksgiving. These clubs were glad to be able to help out the community for the holiday season.
On October 30th, the Unified Peer Partners class hosted the second annual Trunk or Treat event at the high school. Students from Wakanda, Oakland, Downsville, Menomonie Middle School, and Menomonie High School store programs attended the event. Trunks were hosted by a variety of staff paras, admin counselors, and student groups. Student groups that hosted trunks were Peer Partners, the Leadership Class, Student Council, Educators Rising, and Link Crew. Prizes were given out for the best costume, scariest costume, most original costume, and funniest costume. It was a great turnout, and they look forward to next year's event.
On Friday, October 25th, MHS FBLA went to Feed My Starving Children and had a blast. Making the prepackaged meals and learning about the different foods that are common in different countries was exciting to learn about. They packaged 22,896 bags of food that will be given to families. Afterwards, they attended a business field trip learning about the history of Skyzone and their ranking and revenue. FBLA had such an amazing trip.
15 FBLA members attended the Wisconsin Fall Leadership Conference in Stevens Point, November 3rd through the 5th. Miss Wisconsin was the keynote speaker. The focus of the conference was to learn about developing leadership skills. Students attended workshops that taught skills needed to be leaders in school, in our communities, and in our personal lives.
Girls cross country finished 7th at the WIAA Division I state meet. Lauren McCall was named All-State First Team for her finish. All 7 runners earned academic All-State awards as well. And then today, both the middle school and high school held their annual Veterans Day assembly.
And then also a little update on Student Council. We are bringing a new event to Student Council, so we will be starting doing service Saturdays. So one Saturday every month, the members of Student Council and we're going to invite other clubs and students in the high school to join us. We're going to go out and volunteer somewhere. We're not entirely sure where we're going to volunteer right now, but once a month on Saturday we will be volunteering. So, yeah. Thank you for this opportunity to share about the current events happening within our school community. Thank you.
Thank you so much for taking your time to be here.
I think just add on to what already was said about the Veterans Day program at the high school and at the middle school, and what Rachel has already talked about, what a fine program it was. The students led the history of Veterans Day and did an outstanding job. But one of the things that just really struck me that I wanted to acknowledge was the musical program and the talents of those musicians. There were just 7th and 8th graders. There were well over 150 of them performing in jazz band, regular band, choir, and orchestra. And it was really impressive, the job that they did.
Thank you so much for being here and for sharing all of that. It's really wonderful to hear on all the amazing stuff going on. Appreciate your time. Up next, we have community communications. This is a time to air concerns and express your opinion on issues. There should be no negative personal attacks against any individuals, including staff, board members, or administrators. The opinions, beliefs, and viewpoints expressed by the various speakers during community communications do not necessarily reflect the opinions, beliefs, or viewpoints of individual board members, the board as a whole, or the district of the Menomonie area. It looks like we have one speaker tonight, Josie Coleman.
And I reside in now. I wanted to acknowledge and thank our veterans for their service today too, and I'm really thankful that we have such a wonderful program at the school. So Dr. Zadowski, Madam Chairman, and members of the board. When I walked into the Knapp Elementary School several years ago at the beginning of the school year, I was somewhat disturbed to see rainbows on several bulletin boards. I love rainbows because of the message of hope they bring. But something was missing. Not one of those rainbows had a Noah's Ark under them. Rather, they have messages of diversity and equality and inclusion beside the rainbows. As you know, symbols mean something. In our culture right now, the rainbow has been stolen by the LGBTQ plus ideology to portray that all manner of diverse sexual perversions need to be not just accepted, but celebrated. This is particularly true of the homosexual lifestyle. So now a very good thing, a rainbow, has been hijacked by a very bad thing, homosexuals, and it's called good. Thus, good is called evil, and evil is called good. I'm going to tell you about the origin of the rainbow. This story should be told in every elementary classroom so that children can know the beautiful truth. Once, a long time ago, the human beings on earth were becoming more and more debauched. They were beginning to partake in all manner of evil, including sexual sin. The Lord God, the creator of the world, saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. He decided to destroy the many he had created, but one man found grace in God's eyes. That man was Noah. God instructed Noah to build an ark to save him and his family and 2 of every animal. Then it rained and poured for 40 days. But Noah, his family, and the animals were safe in the ark. When Noah and his family left the ark, God put a rainbow into the sky. It was a reminder to all mankind that God, the creator of all things, would never again destroy the world by a flood. It is a wonderful promise. Every display that contains a rainbow must also show an ark to remind us of God's covenant to never again destroy the earth with a worldwide flood. Let's teach the truth about rainbows in Menomonie, SMDA, SDMA. Thank you.
Okay, next up we have revenue and expenditure reports for the month ended October 2024.
So, thank you. I'd like to start out with the revenue report for month ended October of 2024. As you can see, it's not unusual. A lot of revenue still needs to come in during this time. But again, not unusual for October of 2024 to have a lot of those blank spaces. As far as admission fees, those were down a little bit. Last year I looked up, there was a little over 73,000. This year it was 59,000. And so that is down a little bit. Also, last time there was a question about equalized aid. So in September, that first payment of equalized aid, you can see there nearly $4 million. We do receive 4 payments per year. The next one will come in early December, and that'll be approximately 40% of the money that's due to the district. The third payment will be in late March, equaling approximately 24-25%. And then the last payment would be in mid-July for 34% of it. Any questions with the revenue report?
Thanks for clarifying that last time. Good memory.
Before you move on to the expenditures, just a couple of comments on the revenue report. The lower admissions revenue could be expected for 2 reasons, and it would have been before Eric came, but first of all, we're not charging admission to high school students this year for school events, so I'm sure there's a little bit that could be considered there. But then another thing is we did not have a home playoff game for the football season, and those are by far our largest gates. So those 2 things would directly impact the admissions revenue. And then with equalized aid, I want to point out, and we've talked about our budget quite a bit. I don't want to go too far into it today, but about 75% of the school referendums last week passed. And what's important to note is that anytime there is a positively aided school district that passes a referendum, you would logically think that their spending would increase. As their spending increases, they will receive a larger piece of the state aid pie, if you want to call it that. So, in Menomonie, where we've held our spending down, it ends up actually shifting some of the burden locally as opposed to having the state fund that through equalization aid. We still did a really good job capturing as much aid as possible. Our aid went up was about 9% this year through some really wise transactions by the board at the end of last year's budget. However, it's going to be an uphill climb as more and more districts pass referendums.
Moving on then to the expenditures by object. Again, you can kind of see the breakdown there as far as percentages. There's 3 things I'd like to point out. It looks like textbooks were up a little bit from last year. I did some research and that had to do with, it looked like a middle school science book that was new this year that increased that a little bit. An increase in personal services also, and that had to do with, it looked like a staff training. But again, that would be covered by an ESSER grant. So again, an increased expense, but it looked like it was being covered by a grant. And then an increase in dues and fees. And it looked like there was a middle school field trip to the Ordway. It was a Fund 21 item middle school field trip that wasn't taken the year before, but it looks like they go on that on every other year because the year before, so for 22-23, it looked like that was on the books. So again, a little bit of a discrepancy from last year because of that category. Any questions on the expenditure by object?
I just want to say, I really appreciate that kind of pointing out the causes for that. That's really helpful. I think that's the kind of detail which I really appreciate because it's easy to get lost in all the numbers and all the bounce around and just like, yeah, there's this thing happening and here's why. That's super helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. And then finally, the expenses by function, again, just a couple things. You can see instructional staff was up, and again, that was for that ESSER training, just in the function rather than the object. And then increase too in central services. It looked like there was a principal training, I believe that's for Act 20, that was new this year, and that is why the increase in that as well. Any questions on that last one?
There's no questions. I just also want to echo what you said. Thanks a lot. It's really helpful to figure out what to focus on to get that accurate information. So thank you.
Thank you.
Board docs just closed on me. All right, great. Next up, we have our monthly employment reports.
Board members, you've had time to review this report, and in the theme of highlighting the reports, I'd like to point out that we did receive a resignation from our lead system administrator in terms of our technology department. And he will be resigning at the end of the month. Actually, December 6th will be his last day. That job has been posted. And Katie has done a really good job within our department, cross-training. So I think we're going to be in a good spot, a much better spot than what we would have been a few years ago for this transition. But we are hoping to hire someone that has a lot of expertise with computer system administration. Katie, she says that network issue too. You maybe some other thanks.
It's fully charged, so. Any questions about the monthly employment report? Sorry about that. Next up, we have the consent agenda. I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second. Motion by Amber, second by Michelle. And tonight we have minutes from our regular board meeting of October 14th and our special board meeting of October 28th. Financial reports, we have our general fund checks in the amount of $2,261,684.31 and cash receipts in the amount of $146,215.29 for October. We have no donations exceeding $1,000. And finally, we have a request for MHS Choir to take out-of-state travel to attend the Dorian Vocal Festival at Luther College. Any questions on the consent agenda or discussion? If there's no questions, let's vote.
That's to make that. But I didn't take that, I just, that's tomorrow.
All right, and motion passes unanimously. Next up, we have the personnel consent agenda. I'll entertain a motion to approve the personnel consent agenda.
I second.
Motion by Dominique, second by Emily, and we just have one retirement tonight. And that's it. You want to say anything about that?
Yes, Ms. Schuster has submitted her request to retire at the end of the school year. She's been in the school district for over 24 years, so we're certainly going to miss her, but we wish her well in retirement. And yeah, that's it. We hate seeing our veteran people retire, but we're always happy for them when they reach that milestone.
If there's no questions or discussion on the personnel consent agenda, let's vote. And motion passes unanimously. All right. Next up, we have discussion of the 2025-26 district calendar. So it looks like we have a draft here that has, this is the first draft, right? So this has not necessarily gone through a process of vetting the staff and everything yet.
Correct. This is an initial draft put together by the administrative team to see if the board has any specific parameters. This would be kind of the status quo draft based on what we've done over the past year. It has been shared with the QIC group, teachers and hourly staff members who have been discussing it at their buildings. We will be having a QIC meeting the first Monday of December. And then based on feedback from the board, based on feedback from the staff, we will bring the board a final draft to consider or discuss more at the December meeting. We do try to have a calendar approved in December if possible. It could get pushed to January if needed, but there are families that like to plan ahead, so that's what we try to do. I'd like to point out that the way that some of the holidays fall, it does include a longer winter break, a full 2 weeks. It still does include a spring break that is aligned with the university, and it also includes a break over Thanksgiving week. The challenge is that it has a full week of school the first week of June. And, the parent-teacher conferences, the quarter and term marks, those need review yet with the building principals tomorrow. So I won't spend a lot of time considering the quarters or the parent-teacher conferences. But in terms of, how the school year lays out, some other options that we looked at included shortening some of the breaks to try to get done earlier. However, when we studied this in depth over the last several years, we are very concerned with student attendance, especially the week of Thanksgiving. With the number of families that travel and the number of people that hunt, we saw student attendance, especially at the middle school and high school, drastically impacted that week. So while I don't prefer to go 5 days from June 1st to June 5th, I do get concerned with the idea of having days of school with kids not being there. Any thoughts from school? Oh, I do want to point out too, it does include continuing our Jumpstart program in August. That is very important for enrollment and even more importantly for getting kids started in the school year, getting the ground running. We found that to be very successful the last couple of years. We do recommend that continue in 2025, 2026.
So I think this current year we're in 2024, this is the second year we've done a full week of Thanksgiving, if I recall correctly. It sounds like that's been beneficial. I'm curious if there's been direct feedback from parents or staff. I remember there was one concern 2 years ago about, students with special needs or families who rely on school lunches over that long of a time span. So that concern for Thanksgiving, also concern for 2 weeks over the other holidays. I'm sure you consider all this. I'm just kind of curious how you feel that balances out.
Almost all of the feedback we received last year for the Thanksgiving break was positive. However, yes, there are critical services that our schools provide, and anytime we don't offer school even for a day, I do think that can be difficult. Trying to balance that with having school days of, maybe 50% attendance, it's a tough balance. And I don't think there's a perfect solution, but I think this solution is pretty good.
And thinking about the week of June, the full week in June, which week do you anticipate that the summer school program would start? Would it be the 15th or the 22nd?
We've discussed that. Sam, it was gonna be the 15th, I believe, wasn't it?
Yep, I'm pretty sure that's what we had talked about. We haven't fully vetted that yet, looking back into 2026, but that's what we're anticipating, starting the 15th.
I just know that a lot of teachers, especially those who teach summer school, cherish a bit of time between the last day of school and the first day of school. So, yeah.
And so with having that full first week in June, staff would have to come back for professional development the following Monday, is that right? That's usually not preferred by a lot of people.
It isn't, but I was surprised because we had a very similar situation in one of the recent calendars, and we were told almost unanimously that people would rather have, for instance, December 23rd off and have to come back that Monday. Also, there were some specific situations where the building principals are able to work with the teachers who may need use a personal day for that June 8th, and as long as they have checkout completed. And we do know there's some people that really, really do not like to take personal days during student days. So I would anticipate a number of those requests for June 8th in this calendar, that if this is approved.
The other thing about going to the 5th is how are we for weather days?
What's your question?
With going all the way to June 5th, how are you going to do with weather days?
Yeah, that's something to consider. I mean, we haven't had many snow days lately, but you know Murphy's Law and stuff. What I can tell you is that we have a lot of options, and I think instead of adding days, more than likely what we've done in the past is we've extended some days. For instance, maybe in the fourth quarter, made days 10 minutes longer. Another thing we could do that we've done before is actually, we don't have an April PD day built into this one, so that would not be an option. I take that back. There would not be as much flexibility in the event that we had one of those years where there were 10 snow days.
Do you know offhand how many kind of flex days are built into the calendar as it is now?
I hesitate to put the exact number on it. I would say somewhere between 3 and 5.
Okay.
It just depends on which level we're talking about, and any potential changes to the student day.
I was also going to ask about the lack of PT day in April. Is that just because of the need for so many days around the holidays? And how will that impact kind of staff needs as the year goes on?
Yeah, April 6th would be a day that we sometimes have had PD, which would be the day after Easter. We don't notice as much traveling on that day as the other ones, but if we put another professional development day in, we would either have to eliminate one of our student instructional days, which we do not want to do, or that would push us into the second week of June without a corresponding reduction to the days off. And really, the days off, there's not a lot of flexibility there, because we really don't think people would appreciate having to come back for maybe just one day a week, like for instance Monday, November 24th, or Monday, December 22nd. So if we were to go to school on November 24th or December 22nd, we would be recommending that we would also go on that Tuesday. And that comes into the December 23rd day, which we heard loud and clear that that's not something preferred by staff. And then if we go back to those November days, now we're talking about those low student attendance days, where really instruction is not only for the kids who miss, but even the students who do attend school on those days It's just so difficult for teachers to move any instruction forward with that many kids gone. It really is not a very productive use of instructional time.
I appreciate the difficulty, I'm not trying to.
No.
My questions are not meant to be.
You know, I suppose it's possible to, add another jumpstart day and be okay with eliminating another instructional day. But then you are taking away more flexibility for potential snow days, because those jumpstart days do not count towards the hours of instruction for the regular school year. So I don't think we want to paint ourselves in a corner that way either. It's pretty tricky, actually.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Well, I'll be interested to hear what comes out of the, oh, I'm sorry, I was turning the wrong way, now Michelle has questions.
This is me, I just want to say that I figured that QIC had already received this because I've heard from a lot of people about this. And every single thing I'm hearing is positive. Staff are really relieved to see the week at Thanksgiving and the 2 at Christmas. I just think there's a need for that right now. I just wanted you to know.
Thanks for sharing, that was really helpful. Isn't it?
I also want to reiterate something that Rachel started to say is that I was asking a lot of questions because it's a hard problem, but I think it's actually pretty close to like a perfect little jigsaw puzzle here.
Yes.
I am excited to have a conversation with staff, and I've already had a couple emails, and I do think there'll be some different perspectives based on which level staff are at. If you're a first grade teacher, not many of your kids are probably deer hunting. But at the same, we'll see what they have to say and bring something back in December.
More of them probably have the flu though.
Potentially.
Go ahead, Amy. Sorry.
Somewhere I read, and maybe it was in Board Docs, but I said something about possibly adding minutes to a day too, if we get to the point where we have to do that, it also will take care of the snow day we have one or two.
Yeah, we've done that, and I think adding a few minutes to the day in the second semester is something that could be.
Okay, how do we get built-in days? I mean, like the first day is not made up and then the second day is, or?
2 for sure. The first 2 we certainly do not make up. And then after that, it really comes down to the calculation of hours of instruction. And what we were saying before is really, it's kind of between 3 and 5. Students at the secondary level need more hours of instruction than students at the elementary level. So depending on what the closings are for, if they're full day, 2-hour delays, things like that, it gets pretty tricky.
Thank you.
But I can tell you, we would do everything in our power not to bring kids back the second we could change. I would not anticipate that.
Do you still anticipate, do you still anticipate that if there were closures for weather, that high school students would be doing virtual, or doing online school rather than having the day completely off? And would that help mitigate the need for the number of hours?
Yes, that is certainly something that could be considered. I don't have, that's not on my radar at all tonight. In fact, it just blew my mind. We probably need to have a conversation on it tomorrow. Thank you.
Sorry, I wasn't trying to shake you. Sorry about Michelle.
The minutes in the past have been added for this reason. Are those minutes now, did we go back to the regular times or have we stayed with those minutes?
Yes and no. We have added minutes in the past, and at one point, it was preferred by our staff. They saw the benefit of having a longer school day. So our days are longer now than they were, I believe, 7 years ago. I don't think they're as long as when we had added, Brian knows the history on this better than I do. At one point, they were longer than they are now. But no, we never reverted fully back to the shorter days that we had 7 or 8 years ago.
So we do have a little cushion there.
Oh, we do, yes. But, I'm sorry. I mean, this is an onion that we could keep peeling back layers and layers. If you look at the calendar, you look at the number of student days, If you go back several calendars, that day would, those number of days would be much higher than they are.
Any final questions or discussion on the 25-26 calendar? Now we'll move on to new course proposals for 2025.
Brian, take it away.
So this is a report that comes forward once a year. And looking ahead to the next school year, the 25-26 school year is what we're talking about. As you look into the background in Word docs and the attachment that was included, you can see that as we look ahead to next year, the updates that are being shared with you all center around our English language arts department at the high school. Going into next school year, the staff has worked as a team, and as well as with high school admin, our district reading specialist, and myself to take a look at several different options that originated through conversations over several years. But going into next school year, the department is looking at a proposal to add one new course, a half a credit, so a semester-long course around nonfiction writing. A course that they're hoping to call Mustang Messenger, to have students have the opportunity to research and develop publishable writing that's been reviewed and then ultimately results in a quarterly publication in an online format. I've had the opportunity to talk not only with the department, but Mr. Drake and the administration, and I feel that this is something that's well thought out, the approach they're looking at taking with this. So it would be something that I'd be recommending. A new course like this is something that will come back for your approval at our next meeting. And when we take a look at that course, they're proposing that it would be something that would be available to junior and senior level. And then that takes me into a piece of information that I'm sharing for information purposes, which are the other changes that the department is looking at making. So this next step is not something that requires approval, but because of some of the changes, felt it would be good to make sure that we had some conversation and generally some stuff like this at this time, some of these types of reports. So when we take a look at the 11th and 12th grade year, for as long as I've been in the district, we've had two main courses that 11th and 12th grade students take, which are referred to as English 3 and English 4. Each one of those courses are made up of two semester-long courses, and students take that for a year unless they take an AP English class. They are looking at making a name change to reflect the English 3 course, which centers around American literature, and the English 4 course, which centers around British literature, and calling them American Literature 1 and American Literature 2, with the British Literature 1 and 2 represented to the semester. Part of the reason why they're making that change is we've been having ongoing discussion in the department for several years about electives at the junior and senior level being used to fulfill graduation requirements. This is something that we've gone through in many other departments at the high school over the last, I would say, probably 12 years. We've really made it an emphasis to take a look at options and pathways that students have to graduation. So the department, after reviewing their courses and making some updates over time, are at a point where they are in favor of making that shift. So what we've included is a list of the existing courses that up until this point were offered for elective credit only. They're all half credit courses, and transitioning those so that they would also be able to count for graduation requirements. In the state of Wisconsin, students are required to take 4 credits of English while in high school, and the requirement from the state in statute is that as part of that course study, they have a course that involves writing. So it's pretty open to interpretation. And as we look through, we feel confident that having students be able to do this provides increased flexibility for them, And also, one of the things that we've really been having a lot of discussion at the high school level with has to do with the student engagement. And feeling that if students have more of a voice in the pathway they take to fulfilling those requirements, there's the opportunity for some increased engagement in that as well. So, you know, just an update as to what we're looking at doing at the high school next year. I give the department at the high school, the English department, and I give the high school administration a lot of credit for taking this on and spending the time to do this. And our district reading specialist has been very involved in this process as well. And I think that this will be result in some positive outcomes for our students. So with that, I can take any questions, but the one thing that will come back next meeting is the messenger course, because that will be a new course that we require. I love everything about this. I love the Mustang Messenger idea, especially because we have two kind of local journalists in the back. And I know that the idea of doing, you know, fact-based research, nonfiction writing, and having that be a way for students to explore ideas is super important. I absolutely love that idea. I also know that some of the courses, they're going to be contributed toward graduation requirements. Sci-Fi Fantasy and Voices of the Holocaust in particular are loved by the instructors and the students who are involved in those courses. And the idea of getting students involved in things they really need to hear about in literature is so wonderful. So, thank you.
Will the new proposed course count for graduation requirements as well?
Any other question or discussion regarding the curriculum changes? Great. Next up, we have revisions to policy 343.46, early college credit program.
Yeah, I guess I'll just say a couple words though before Brian gives the details. We've been reviewing our policies and trying to make sure that our policies are supporting student success and student achievement. Also, you know, when we look at our student achievement scores and our school report cards, we want to make sure that our policies are supporting that as well. And I've kind of charged Brian in doing that, and that's where these recommendations are coming from. So Brian, go ahead.
All right, so thank you. And so agenda items C and D kind of go together. I'm going to spend a little bit more time on C, and then when we get to D, we can kind of talk through that, how that goes. So when we look at 343.46, and we're looking at the rule associated with early college credit. So this is an option that has been in place for many years for students who are in grades 9 through 12 to take courses outside of the high school at post-secondary level and receive dual enrollment. The only change that we are looking at doing is what's bolded in the attachment, which would be item number 3, and it really falls under the high school administration to review this. But one of the items that we have added is some clarification as to what it means to be a student in good academic standing. So students have to meet the requirements for entrance into that post-secondary institution. So it does mean that they have to be in good academic standing, but it's to us to define that. So adding that language, and really this mirrors many of the expectations that we already have in place that may not have necessarily been in writing, but then also that we have in place for students who participate in things like our internship programs as well. So to go through, and as you look through them, you can see pretty clearly laid out, having a grade point average equals C or better, that they participated in the most recent Wisconsin State Assessment for their identified grade level, at a level, and with a level of proficient or meets, or that they have shown improvement or growth from the prior year. So opportunity of hitting a benchmark or showing growth over the prior year, that they've earned the minimum number of credits for the grade level to be on track for graduation at that point in time, that they attend school on a regular basis. So how we're clarifying that, or quantifying that, is that they're not identified as being chronically absent. And then if they don't meet that above criteria, there is a pathway for approval in specific circumstances. So again, that follows some practice that we have in place for some of our other programming, but helps to clarify that. And as Joe had said, as we take a look at making sure that we are providing opportunities for our students to not only have the opportunity to take these courses, but also making sure that they are also in good academic standing.
So on this policy and on the next one also, there must be some kind of good communication between the university or the college or whatever and the high school. Because I saw in one of those that passing the college course is a requirement in order to get high school credit.
Yes.
So you're in the loop with the.
Yep, so we have a process in place where when students are enrolled, and then that information is shared back as far as whether or not they've passed the class, and there are some very specific timelines. In some cases, that also has to do with how and when billing happens in those spaces, and that's a little over from our existing policy.
Thanks.
I'm curious, the modality of the courses itself, is it online, in person? Does that happen in the high school or at the college setting?
So it really does depend on the course itself. The majority of our courses that students who are at, like UW Stout, most of those courses, not all, are face-to-face, but the modality of the course doesn't impact this policy. And these would be ones for this particular policy and the next administrative rule, the students go on site for them. So it's not part of our academy program, like we have the CBTs.
Just so board members know, I don't think that this is going to be a significant change. I would say that, 95% of the students that typically take advantage of this program would it be far and beyond these expectations. However, we have seen an uptick in the number of students who don't put appropriate effort into the state assessments. We're hoping that this will help encourage appropriate effort. And then the other piece would be attendance. We do have some students that do pretty well academically, but do not prioritize attendance as much as they should. I would say those would be the two biggest areas. But again, we're talking about a very small percentage of students.
I guess the last thing that I would add, I feel right now our high school team does a very good job of communicating expectations on the front end. But part of the reason for bringing this forward now is we're entering into the registration period, and to be able to provide clear and concise communication to families and accurate communication to families as part of that process related to expectations is a priority.
Brian, how would opting out of the state assessment impact this? Will students that opt out, will parents that opt their children out be able to still participate?
So the idea behind this would be for them to opt their child out. That would have to then default into item number 5. What is the justification for the opt-out?
And I think it's great. I think clear expectations and also a pathway for exceptions makes a lot of sense. 4.4 with the attendance issue, is there some sort of time frame with that, like during the current school year, or what if they were identified as chronically absent in the past, currently? And then the other thing besides that is I feel like structurally the way these are laid out, like 1, 2, 3, 4, they aren't à la carte, they're sort of a combined thing. So having 5 be, like, you can't have done both 3 and 5.
Sure.
It's structurally impossible to,
Sure.
so maybe making a way for 5 to be in there is important, but not one of the ones would help my brain understand it better.
No, I appreciate that feedback, and that's a good catch on item number 4 as far as defining, that time frame on there. And then I could see number 5 placing something in there where, it's, 1 through 4, 4, 5, something like that. But, we can definitely work through that before we come back at the next meeting. Because this is one that we'll be bringing back for approval, because it's a policy.
Regarding Amber's question about the chronic absenteeism, is it the case that, that a student who had previously been chronically absent but sort of improved their attendance would still be able to participate?
So that would be a desire, but I think we can clean up that thing. Be able to find out if that's their. So to me, like, your real meat of this, I think, as Joe is moving to, is sort of item 2, right? Well, I not but it's a significant incentive, right? To tell parents, to tell students, if in 2 years' time you want to be getting into, want to be choosing these advanced classes, these new opportunities, you have to be thinking about, like, are you getting yourself ready for these assessments to demonstrate your performance along the way? And like, oh, I didn't know, I think that's a very good incentive. We really do want students who can perform well to demonstrate that they can. That's good for themselves as a way to hone their skills. That's good for the district as a way to demonstrate that that we've got, our students are performing well and are improving over time. So I think that is a very important thing to emphasize as clearly as possible to parents as they register.
One more quick comment, sorry, Abe, I really appreciate that you said that. I think as early as we can make that possible, that communication, middle school, beginning of middle school, even before that, I think this will be beneficial.
Yeah, the high school orientation, I think the middle schoolers coming into high school would be a very good time for that.
I know that a lot of times the middle school kids will tell you, they don't, it doesn't matter, it doesn't have anything to do with my grades, even in middle school. So I think 6, 7, 8, they need to know that that's what's coming in advance.
Thank you.
Right, there are no more questions or discussion on policy 343.46. We can move on to policy 343.45, which is largely the same changes.
It is, and that one's a rule, so it doesn't require board approval. However, based on the board feedback tonight, we will make some modifications, and then whatever modifications are made there will be updated for this rule as well. Brian, anything to add?
The only thing to add with that one is the previous policy had to do with institutions of higher learning that would be identified as universities, where this one has to do with institutions of higher learning that are identified as technical colleges. So that's why they're 2 separate documents.
Any questions on this one? Great, thank you. Next up, we have our annual free and reduced meals eligibility report.
So I appreciate Eric putting this together. Eric, can you point out the numbers for this year?
Yeah, just as you can see from the chart, the free and reduced rate did go down 1.42%. For a district-wide total of 41.54%. Again, not a huge change, just comparing it with the recent past. As you can see there, not a huge change, but a slight decrease nonetheless.
That's one of the things we were discussing last time, is the Angel Fund. I'm curious if this is I don't expect the answer, but the thing that this triggers in my mind is this students and families generally, getting into a better spot with food security? Or is it the case that the way the standards are arranged at the federal level, that we have maybe, are these 1.42% of students, are they now no longer classified as free reduced lunch, but still have food insecurity? And that might be a cause of growing the growing food debt situation, so.
Yeah, like you said, I don't think we know the answer to that, and really, it's such a small change that you'd almost consider it stable from year to year, but the point being is that I don't think some people in our community recognize that, over 40% of our students qualify for either free or reduced lunch. And that comes with a lot of additional considerations as well.
I'm kind of curious, at the district level, as you said, the change is very small, but it's interesting when you look at the breakdown, that it's very small or almost no change at most of the buildings, and a fairly significant change in 2 of the buildings. I think that, I'm curious about what that, you would, don't get into me on the subject because you don't serve lunch, but what that, sort of, if the people on staff at those buildings are feeling that.
We can talk to our principals tomorrow and get back to you.
Sure. It's not, it's just a point that I noticed. No rush. Any additional questions or discussion on the Freedom Reduced School report? Right. Then moving on, we need to set a date for our mid-year budget hearing. So we have a proposed date based on the calendar we've used in past years.
Yes, does anybody, that's what we've done the last several years. Any objection to that for this year as well?
And for,
We'll make sure we share the information with you.
And for folks new to the board or who don't remember, this is before our regular meeting. We would have a 5 o'clock meeting reviewing the, obviously, mid-year budget. Any questions or discussion on that? If there's no objection. Oh, go ahead.
What is it, for the people that may not know about budget hearing and what they can do, they can come and they can speak. About various questions too, so it's not that they're representing the budget and they can sit and listen. They can also participate if they want to.
All right, there's no more question or discussion on the budget hearing. We'll move on to our 2025-26 budget plan and timeline.
I was actually just talking to the superintendent about this last week, and I'm very proud of the process that we use here in Menomonie. The board just approved this year's budget at the last meeting, and you can see that the work is already beginning on next year's budget. And I think because of that, we are able to, really maximize the value that we get out of every dollar, whether it's from local taxes or the state or grants or the wonderful private donations we receive. So you can see that this plan is very similar to what we have had in previous years. It really starts at the building level with budget builders shared with the building principals that is for the sites and the departments. We do have the mid-year budget hearing on January 13th. And then, there's a lot of steps in there. Ultimately, the board will receive the budget in the summer and be able to consider a preliminary budget in June. The annual meeting will be held in August. And then next October, you would expect the board to be able to approve the budget and set the tax levy. So it's kind of a step-by-step process, but are there any questions, feedback, or suggestions for how you would like this process changed?
Yes, when I earmark that, I would hypothesize, I would guess, that next year we might end up with a slightly different process in the wake of strategic planning. So it might be that in the strategic planning process, we learn from the community they want input at a different time or other considerations to bring in. So it might be that this cycle is as it is, but the following cycle might be altered in some way as a result.
Any other thoughts on the budget? None. On to item H, discuss policies and rules for public participation in board meetings. So we have an agenda item that was brought forth by Amy Swanson. We have policy, the relevant policies here are linked, and do you want to start us off, Amy? Do you want to say anything about this, or before we kick off discussion?
Okay, the first one, obviously, we're talking about this, discussion of policy 187, the rule on the policy when it pertains to, public participation in board meetings. And, I just think it's long overdue that we at least have a discussion about this. I'm very concerned that, we have people that come to the board time and time again, and, they, bring up things that I feel like are detrimental to our students and to not only our students, but our families and our teachers too, that are part of a population that we all have to work with in a public school. And so my request would be to, instead of having a free-for-all speaking at a meeting, that it would be nice to be able to have them speak to something that's on the agenda. Many other meetings do this, other school districts do this, city council does it, and it doesn't really negate the fact that people have other things to say, because there's lots of other ways that people can communicate with us outside of the board meeting, email, phone calls, the annual meeting, people can speak, the budget hearing, they can speak. And so I'm just requesting that we could possibly do that. And I would think that maybe we could change the form and maybe just clean it up a little bit and just say, what's the agenda item that you want to speak to on the form. And then the other thing would be, if somebody gets up and it's not gerrymander to the agenda, that would be a point of order that all of us would keep track and say, hey, point of order, that's not on the agenda. You have to sit down. I hate to do this to, for a standpoint of letting other people be able to speak, but it's getting very old and very, to me, worse and worse, especially when it includes our students, our staff, our school board, and so forth. So that's why I'm bringing this for discussion. Thank you.
I don't, it's a subtle question, right? My personal inclination is that something that I kind of want to have conversations with board members from other boards, maybe at the meeting in Milwaukee. I know they always have sessions on topics of speech, and I'm sure this year in particular will be a topic of great interest, along with other student issues, issues of culture and so on. And I wonder if maybe it's something that we can put some effort into, those of us who are attending the meeting, put some effort into kind of getting as much contextual awareness as possible from other districts. I think, I definitely hear what you're saying, and I'm sympathetic to it, but I also think, wow, there have been some, over the years, some really helpful off-topic things that have spurred us to think about other ideas. And that's a balance. The balance has to be, the balance we do in terms of time and agenda and what isn't on the agenda has to, of course, be viewpoint neutral. So that that's definitely a fixed rule under our First Amendment rights. But at the same time, the meetings should run efficiently, and that is a balance. But I don't think it's strongly from our meeting, which I'm kind of rambling, but I feel like it's something I want to talk with other boards about and kind of see what's happened in different parts of the state. There's been a lot of really needed discussions last year, last couple of years, and maybe we can learn from others.
I think this is rare. I disagree with part of it. I feel like over the past few years we have reached the work that they're doing, and I think in some ways kind of special that we have this open communication policy. I think many other boards, it does have to stick to the agenda, or like Elk Mound, I don't believe they have
section, they have people that come before the meeting. And so we have this special thing, but I think in reality it has been high. And we haven't been efficient, and we hear the same things over and over, and a lot of things that are outside the purview of the school board. And so I think, it does, like you were saying, it doesn't mean that, you know, all these like special or not off, did you say off topic? I can't quite remember exactly what you said, but all the like special things we have heard from people, that's really cool because of the policy we have. They can still reach out to us, and we could still invite anyone to come and speak to us. But I think that our current policy has been abused, to the detriment of people in our community. And I'm ready to alter it a little bit, in a way that makes our meetings more efficient and, potentially protects vulnerable. Any other immediate thoughts? If you want to. I do have mixed feelings about this as well, but I lean towards some of the things that Dominique is saying because it has been abused, and I am concerned about the well-being of our students and staff and community. And I think that we have a responsibility to that as well. Sure, yeah, Joe, do you have thoughts on?
Yeah, I mean, this topic has been researched quite a bit and discussed, you know, by the School Board Association, the attorneys and such, and I think Abe qualified it pretty well. Really, the options that the board has are either one, to do what we do and have it be pretty open, with, you know, some key caveats of no personal attacks and things like that. You could limit it to the agenda, which I think is what Amy is suggesting, or you could eliminate public comment altogether. But what Abe said about viewpoint neutral is very important. You know, there are, for instance, we had a speaker come in last meeting and compliment the board, and, you know, really that wasn't, related to the agenda directly. It will also put pressure on the board to monitor the speech and then make that determination whether or not something is related to the agenda. And how tight it's related to the agenda is subjective. You know, so you do expose yourselves to having to make that determination. You still have to make that decision now, but I think it's a little more clear in terms of what would be considered a personal attack, you know, naming individual people and such. I think it's probably an easier decision, an easier judgment with the current policy than it might be with the current agenda, if you went that way. I think either way does work. I think schools do it, but I think the board would want to consider, you know, the legal aspect of this. And from my perspective as a superintendent, if you do want the policy modified, I would certainly want to work with the School Board Association and provide you with a recommendation that has been vetted by attorneys.
So you made mention, example from last meeting with positive comments made. Can you remember any other, things in your tenure, where someone had something pretty important to the attention of the board that may not have been on the agenda? I mean, I can kind of maybe.
Well, I think some other recent ones, you know, we have had people come in and talk about concerns about bullying. We have also had people come in and talk about certain facility concerns, also offer some programming suggestions. And then, some complementary pieces of certain programs and certain activities. That's what comes to mind right now, Dale.
Can I just ask a question about, so I know it says personal attack, like naming somebody. Where does that kind of stand with like certain groups of people that are continuously brought up and attacked?
That's a little broader, and it's probably more difficult to identify what would be considered an attack. I don't think is probably the right word. I think I used it as well. It's really more of the individual identification. And frankly, the board really should not be allowing public comments, even in complimentary fashion, if it's talking about specific people. There actually, it's been, one example where a family talked about their own child, and a board, not locally, but a board allowed that to happen. And that actually ended up in a lawsuit where the same family then sued the board for allowing them to use that public forum to talk about their own kid. I mean, it's a very unique example, but to your question, I think it's really difficult to understand what would be considered an attack on a whole group. I think it would have to be pretty direct. I don't think I have heard much over the years here that would reach that level as far as I would be concerned. Even though I'm concerned about some of the impression that some of the comments lead to, like I know many of you are. However, I don't think that would probably cross the legal line from what I've read.
I think that at a time when we are focusing on increasing trust in the community, having this open thing is really important. And I'm reluctant to put limits on that. But I also don't like the tone that it sets for every meeting where anybody in our community is called evil, things like that. That doesn't start a meeting in a good place for any of us, for anybody who's listening, it's really hard to come back from that and talk about the budget. I don't think that that's fair to our students, our staff, our families, our communities. But again, with free speech, we have to be very careful about picking and choosing. We want people to come with concerns. We want people to show up here, not just patting us on our back and telling us we're doing a good job. We want to hear the criticisms and the things that we can do better and the things that we can work on better. So I don't know how to balance that. I wish I did. I thought about it all week, thought about it all the last several years. But one thing I thought is maybe we could move the public comments to the end of the meeting. I don't know, just if there's anything structurally that we could do that keeps that really important time, but doesn't put our community in the position of listening to things that they will then have a hard time coming back and governing and focusing on what we're all trying to do together.
I think one thing that Amy suggested is distinguishing between what's on the agenda and what isn't. Even that could be an important step, right? Saying, here's the public comment on this agenda item to keep in your mind as you discuss, whatever the calendar or something like that, right? Versus here's a public comment which is not on the agenda, which is not an agenda topic, which could potentially still be allowed by whatever future rules, but is kind of set aside from the on-topic discussions on the actual agenda. I could see some sort of, again, this is the sort of thing where I want to have asked WASB, like what is allowable, what's possible, or what's too much administrative overhead. Like, is there a way to not necessarily change? We have timing limitations, which are viewpoint neutral. We have, the way it is in the agenda right now. We could maybe separate that out a little bit to say here's on-topic discussion and here's off-topic discussion in two different parts of the meeting. That might make it very long meetings though, so I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say. But I think we're all grappling with the same questions. So
Could we make it where there's one meeting a month or a thing so that there's still time for everybody's viewpoints? You know, people who are showing up here, it's someone who cares about the school and the community. I don't want anyone to not show up, but to sort of herd that so we can have more efficient meetings and more, I don't know.
Yeah, to answer your question, yes, you could just determine which meetings allow for public comment and which ones don't. I also believe what Abe suggested, you could have 2 public comment periods if you wanted to, one related to the agenda and one with other topics not related to the agenda. When you first brought up, Amber, the idea of having it at the end of the meeting, when I was in Cadet for 5 years, that's how the public comments were handled at the end of the meeting. And when I came here, and especially in some of the meetings where there's a lot of public comments, I kind of missed that because, you know, it is nice for the board to get right to work and get the board business done. At the same time, I've seen over the years the value of having public comments early, especially since when there are public comments directly related to the agenda, I think it's awfully difficult for those in the public to then, you know, not have their voices heard until after the action or discussion has already taken place. And I also think it's hard for the board not knowing what those concerns or suggestions are prior to discussing or taking action on a topic. So especially related to items that are relevant to the agenda, I think having them at the beginning of the meeting is important. The other ones that potentially could be done at the end of the meeting, if that's something the board wants to do. I think maybe taking a little bit of time and then potentially also maybe having some conversations could be beneficial as well. I think there might be some conversations that could help.
Kind of in line with that, but a little more radical. I would be in favor of ending community comments for a period of time. I mean, I know that's not how we wouldn't necessarily write the policy that way, but changing it so it's done and then doing this research to think, okay, how can we re-implement this in a way that is better and maybe safer? Because one of the frustrations I have that it feels like we're working really hard to preserve this thing the way it is for like the few positives that it has brought us when it has clearly not been dominated that way. And the guy who spoke last week, he can send an email. I will teach him. He could send an email, we'll invite him back. But no, but I think that I also think that if we were to take time and say, and close it down for a bit, that also sends a message that it's not working right now and we want to find a better. I don't think we have to keep using what isn't really working for us until we find something better. And I also, one more thing, I think that no matter what we do, it's going to be interpreted as trying to close communication, even though I know that's not our intention. And so whatever decision we make has to be because it's what we want to do and what we think is best, not because of trying to avoid that perception.
Thanks for the discussion. I really appreciate the discussion, and and I appreciate the fact that I was able to bring this to the board for discussion. I heard a lot of good comments, and I guess after hearing everything and what you said about maybe shutting it down for a little while, but not with the intention of shutting down communication ever, because they can still email, people can still call us, they can still whatever. I think that's fair to say, but maybe we need to put a hiatus on it just until maybe after the school board convention, state convention, because as Abe mentioned, there's always sessions in there about public communication, and there's people down there and lawyers that we can talk to, and just like Joe said, if we change the policy, it would probably be good to talk to attorneys to make sure that we're not out of line or not doing something that's illegal. So I would be happy to do that if the rest of the board would be interested in doing something like that.
I wanted to say one thing, but I also have a clarifying question. When you say you would be happy to do that, you mean what Dominique, like putting a pause on community communications for a short amount of time and it coming back to something different?
Yeah, with your research, talk to lawyers, talk to philosophy.
Yeah.
Tend to take those sessions that can do this, and then come back and decide what we want to do.
That makes a lot of sense. I just wanted to make sure I understood you. I just wanted to also point out, besides the state education convention, which probably many of us will be attending in Milwaukee in January, we also have, later tonight, we'll be talking about our board development survey, which is not specifically related, but I do think tangential when we think about how we as a board want to be interacting with feedback from the community. And additionally, of course, the upcoming strategic planning work that, kind of launch early next year, which will be obviously a much more robust opportunity for community input. Yeah, go ahead.
About stopping public comment for a while. Policy 171.2, agenda preparation and dissemination, does call for each regular monthly board meeting agenda shall include a period for public comment. So that's the board policy. If the board would like to not do that, I think it would be appropriate at the onset of the next meeting for the board and the opening items to have a motion and a vote to suspend the rules, which I think would need to pass by a 2/3 approval. I'd have to double check the legal piece on that. I think the board would want to make sure you don't violate your own policy. That's what I'm saying.
Very good point.
And that's a policy that was set by the SMA board and is not necessarily something that would show up in Wisconsin state statute.
Correct. Yeah, and it was last revised May 24th, 2021.
And that's something that could be done on the day of, when of agenda revision.
Correct.
Someone over here? Thought I saw someone to my left. Reaching for the microphone. Was it Abe?
I was just counting meetings until the convention. Yeah, there's like 2 meetings until the convention, so, I'm wondering if it's worth the administrative effort to do so, but, that's, since you asked, I wasn't gonna say that, but since you asked what I was about to not ask, that's what I was thinking about.
Actually, it'll be 3 meetings because we have the one in December, January, yeah, forget that.
And the January meeting, of course, well, the one,
December and January, that meeting too.
you're right, and January is gonna be the budget hearing, which certainly need public input at that point, right, for that. So, the timeline is actually pretty short in terms of number of meetings until then, but I totally get that, that idea of like, let's make a clean slate, kind of come up with a new system.
Does it make sense to change the policy so that it reads that we may have a public comment at each meeting?
In other words, the policy would not, it would say may instead of will,
Shall, or whatever.
If you do that, though, you're putting that on the board president and me as we develop each board agenda. I guess I would probably prefer to have board direction on something like this. Because if it is up to me, I would just have it. If it says may.
Yeah, I think that, like, if it says May, then every 2 weeks when we're setting the agenda, there's a question of, well, does community comments go on this time? Unless we are, as a board, discussing a very specific time limit for suspending them. Does that make sense? I think since my personal preference, since there is an option to suspend the rules as Joe sort of outlined, I'm not sure policy change now makes sense.
I think Dominique was absolutely right when she said that, like, we want to come up with something that makes sense and is intentional about what our goals are and what the, how it will, how meetings can be improved by a new communication design. And I think that is also part of the broader theme we've had the last year or so, really thinking about public communication in a broad sense, how we reach out to the community, how we hear from the community, and making sure that we're getting at times when like in the times and places where it is most useful and most fruitful to get as much, kind of feedback and information as we possibly can. So I think that point about not just like tweaking the word here or there, but really like what we really want to do, I think we should really contemplate that and come up with a good solution.
And I think related to what Dominique said earlier, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, like, we talk a lot about not making changes or how like any changes to our current policy, would seem like that, but I think it's important to acknowledge that our current system has significant barriers. There's a lot of people in the community who don't and won't ever come address the board in that setting, right? Because it's can be daunting. It's a very specific time. You got to be here by 5:45. It's not something that is ever going to be open to everyone. And I do think it's important to acknowledge that as we think about what is the right mode to take community comment in.
Especially since the things that people are going to be most concerned about and most passionate about likely involve their own family members or close friends, in which case we're back to the problem that in public meeting we can't have comment on individual situations, which I think compounds that problem. That like there's a very hard filter on who's actually on which collections of people with different lifestyles and family situations can get to the meeting at 5:45, file a piece of paper, and speak at the appropriate moment when they're trying to, get kids home from school, get dinner on the table, get home from a job, go to a job at third shift or whatever. Like it really narrows down who we're hearing from. So deficiencies in the current system, absolutely.
So, if I may, I think what I'm hearing is that there's a lot of interest in revisiting our community communication, spending some time thinking about a system that works better in a lot of ways. And we've also discussed a number of opportunities for kind of diving into that and developing it further, right? Including at the State Education Convention, including in our own board retreat, and also including through, I think, our strategic planning process. We have discussed an option for if board members wish to, as early as our next meeting, we could suspend rules and make a change in an immediate sense. I feel right now I am not hearing a strong desire to act on drafting a new policy between now and December. Am I reading that wrong? Does anyone think that's wrong? All right. Is there anything else we want to? So I think we can come back to this, right? I think this is something that we have, that's some opportunities ahead of us to come back to further discuss. Can we move on? Is there anything more anyone wants to say on the topic?
I just appreciate the very great discussion and hearing me out. I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
No, thanks for bringing it up. Thanks everyone for engaging with it. We're ready to move on. We have a discussion of policies and rules for the selection, evaluation, and reconsideration of educational materials. Again, I think all of the relevant policy, rule, and exhibit are linked here, as well as the request for this agenda item, which also came from Amy Riddle Swanson. Do you want to pick us up again, Amy?
Sure. This is kind of related to the public participation in some ways, because the books that have been being asked to be banned from this policy, using this policy, are books that, again, address our vulnerable populations in our school district. And so these books come forward, and everybody knows they go through reconsideration committee, there's a discussion, there's a vote, and all the times we've had these, they've always been put back into the library. And then, and my thinking is that, you know, once it gets to the board, that's the final say. But this last round that we had, there were 2 books that had been previously asked to be banned, and they were not at that time, and then they were brought back. And our policy at this point states that it's 1 year, they can bring those books up again. But I would like to see that policy change if at all possible. And this may be a little harsh, but you know, we can discuss. But my biggest thing is, I would like to say that once a book has been brought to reconsideration committee and is put onto the board, and it's still, you know, voted in to stay in our library, that that's the end of it, and that it should never come back up again. So, any discussion?
I feel like language is fluid and changing, and things that were considered appropriate 15 years ago or not 50 years ago have come back and forth. So I don't know that I will go never again, you don't pass. But I do think, given all of the time and energy and resources that go into this process, a year is a very short amount of time to be able to bring the same thing up again. And I would be in favor of extending that to 3 years or 5 years or something a little more robust, so that if a book does come up again, it's with a fresh understanding of why it might be coming up or what's happening.
I'll add to that a little bit. I feel the same way. I think there is a time and place for it. And 3 to 5 years, 3 or 5, that's kind of what I had bouncing around in my mind. Just because as we have kids coming into the district, you know, in kindergarten or just new students from elsewhere, our families are changing all the time. Kids are graduating and our community is changing all the time. So I would hate to just never again can this book come up. But I definitely would be willing to think about a year different than 1 year, because that really is short.
I agree. It's a lot of resources to go through the process, which is fine. Like, we have the process for a reason, and I think everyone's willing to do it. But to reuse those resources for the same book within a year span is really short. I think splitting the difference at like 4 years. But I'm good with 3 or 5.
There's something else about this policy that I find frustrating. And that is like the question of, like in a court, you call it the question of standing. Right? I mean, maybe this is the way it has to be. I'm not a lawyer. I'm certainly not a first-amendment lawyer, and this is a kind of thing where I would want to talk to people at Wasby. But like wrapping around the back of my mind is, why does, like, I understand parents and guardians raising concerns about books which affect the children that they're the parent or guardian of. I don't understand a completely broad, like, you know, anyone who has, for reasons that are not specific to a particular student's classroom experience, raising those those considerations. Again, I'm not a lawyer, so maybe I'm way off base on this, but my impression is it just seems wild to not only use resources frequently, but use it when there's not even a an individual student experience in their consideration. That, you know, a student whose educational outcomes, an actual human individual with a name and a grade and a teacher and a classroom experience, who is you know the focus of the discussion. It's just kind of vague, and that seems bewildering to me. So that's not about the timeline at all, but that's an aspect of this policy which I find very confusing.
There is an opt-out policy for anyone that wants to have their children not read books, you know, or whatever. And so that's another way out. But I don't think it's fair to take the books out of the hands of others that it might be something that they need to know themselves or that kind of thing. In other words, taking books away from everybody is, to me, is not fair. And I'm, to be honest, very discriminatory.
So policy 361, educational material selection and evaluation. On the bottom part of the policy where it discusses the reconsideration procedures, it clarifies that any district resident may raise objection. And I think that's to Abe's point. I will say that, you know, our district residents are all part of their school district, you know, especially when we look at the funding. But also, you know, there could be people that may or may not have kids, or may be planning to have kids, or may have already had their kids go through, but have a vested interest in what our community is valuing. So I think that's a little bit of a slippery slope. I caution the board to limit. I think your point's well taken, but we could check. We probably could limit it legally, but I would certainly want to talk to an attorney, but I probably would not advise it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was not putting it as a strong legal, strongly supported legal point of view. Thank you.
So to the other point with regard to a kind of time limit or a lengthening of the time limit. Sorry if I'm saying that correctly. I guess, first of all, I am curious if there is a legal reason for the 1 year being in there right now.
I don't believe so. I'll double check for certain, but I think the board can set whatever limit the board wants.
Okay, it sounds like, people can jump in if they think I'm wrong. It sounds like there's some support for changing that from the 1 year to 3, 4, 5 years. Does the board want to ask our administration to vet that policy, and start working on a draft? Is that the right step, or do you want us to work on a draft?
No, I think that would be appropriate. We can also do some checking with other similar schools and bring forward a recommendation for you. Maybe ours is an outlier. Maybe 1 year is less than what typically is seen. I really don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we can do some research and we can bring back a policy recommendation. And then even at that time, the board can modify it based on the board's budget.
Do folks feel good about that? Any concerns or final thoughts on the matter?
I just am kind of just swimming in all of this. I just want to make sure as a board, we're representing all in our community. And I feel like we're kind of jumping around this. I don't think they're vulnerable. I think it's marginalized individuals. We're talking about LGBTQ folks. We're talking about Black individuals. We're talking about different populations in this community that are marginalized. And I don't want to just kind of talk, about it instead of naming it directly. And to me, that's where I'm coming from, is that this is our responsibility to be a school board member. And when we start our meetings, we talk about the mission. It's all students. And I really feel like we need to be cognizant when we're making these decisions, how we're impacting lived experiences of people in our community who may be different than us.
Thank you, Emily. I appreciate that very much, naming them.
Okay. So we will, is it reasonable in December to be looking at a draft policy? This one would be pretty small change. So we'll have this come back in December for a first reading of a policy change. Great. Additional thoughts on this?
Thanks, Stan, for the discussion.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
One thing I thought is, did that change anything with the reconsideration committee and their one-year appointment?
I don't think it would need to change anything, no, not for me.
Thank you.
Good question. All right, next up, we have a discussion of plan for board visits to school. So we had some proposed schedule that we talked about at our last meeting, and there were a whole lot of calendar conflicts for doing that. And so I think, there's very little in board docs right now. You have a proposal?
Yeah, we had the schedule and then, we bumped it back from 4 to 4:30, but it became pretty clear that it just was not going to work for a majority of board members. So we are open, this is part of our work plan, we are open to providing, some other solution. If the board has a desired solution, we're certainly open to it. What we did, previously is we did have a board meeting scheduled at each location. It's not the easiest thing to do, but we certainly could do that again and, conduct the tours along with the board meeting. That might be the most reasonable way to do it. I know your calendars are all packed. I know everyone has different lives and, unless there's a different idea that you want us to do, we just want to make sure we, meet the expectations of the board for this item.
So the idea, I think, that's kind of being floated is, what would you think, starting in January or starting in February, we would start scheduling some of our meetings at the different school sites?
Yeah, I think, maybe waiting until after the January meeting because we have the mid-year budget hearing. I would like to have that. Well, you know what? Now that I say that, we could do it at the high school. So yes, yeah, we could start in January.
Never mind.
Yeah, there really is no reason why we could not start even as soon as December. Frankly.
Sure.
It would not be difficult to do.
Okay. December we do, well, we haven't gotten there, but potentially have a retreat, which might be harder to not have here. Yeah. But we could start in January. So what we did in the past for newer board members is we had a meeting at each of the school sites, and prior to the start of each meeting, so either at like 5:15 or 5:30, for like math and so it didn't take long. We would have the school principal or other personnel, whoever wanted to come early or was able to come early, a short tour of the building. Does that feel like it fits a little bit better than the schedule we were looking at before? I personally really enjoyed that process. I realized it is a lot of work for Jenny, and that we were putting out some of our principals, but I really appreciated the time they put into it and being able to see every building was great. And I wouldn't mind doing it all again.
Okay, I'll meet with the principals tomorrow. We'll put together a schedule and we'll check this item off the list.
Yeah, thank you so much. Okay, as has been teased, now we will set a date for a board retreat to review results of the WASB Board Development Survey. Do you know, Joe, has everybody taken the survey?
I do not know that.
Everyone take the survey? Honor system? Okay. We have a proposal here to come in early for our next scheduled regular meeting on December 9th. We could order in food and we could analyze the results of that board development tool that we all have now taken and discuss any planning you want to do for our own development as board. Does that work for folks?
Can you clarify, are you saying after or before the meeting?
I think before.
I'm sorry, you're saying have the board retreat before the regular meeting?
Yes.
Yeah.
That is an idea. Does that work?
I will be out of town and presenting at a conference in Hawaii.
Would be
December 9th.
Yeah. 4th through the 10th.
Good to know.
I could try to call in, but I don't know the time change. I think it's like 6 hours.
Yeah.
Might be the feed.
It would be great, I mean, obviously it can be hard, it would be great if everyone present. Is there anyone else who couldn't come on the 9th? Would we want to look at, we don't have a special meeting scheduled for December because that would fall during the week of the Christmas break. Would we want to look at scheduling a special meeting later in December, for example, the 16th? Bill, did you have something to say? Oh, you've got your mic on, so.
I was just gonna say that doing it before the meeting seems kind of. And I also didn't like it after the meeting at night because of the concert.
Oh. Right.
I like the idea of the 16th, like during our normal meeting then.
The 16th during our, yeah, so would, 16th is the third Monday, so wouldn't typically have a meeting, but like during, like at 5:30.
Just so you know, there is a choir concert that evening at 7, but yes, but I think no matter when you do it in December, there's going to be either a ball game or a concert.
Would December 16th work for, is there anyone it wouldn't work for? Emily, you're back on the 10th, right?
I am, yes. I will be back, thanks.
We look at it a smidge earlier on the 16th. Concert.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know how long it takes to get from where we are to where we are.
As long as you want. Would 5 o'clock work for everyone? Is there anyone 5 o'clock wouldn't work for? Okay, so should we do 5 o'clock on the 16th? Hopefully be done within 2 hours and folks can get to the choir concert?
Yes.
Okay.
And can Jenny and I kind of figure out location and all that stuff?
Yeah, sorry, I thought we'd be here, but if you want to.
So 5 o'clock on December 16th, and we'll set something good up.
All right, great.
Question. We're just gonna talk about, evaluation, we're not gonna talk about like other things or policies or anything, it's just gonna be mainly to talk about that and then decide how we're gonna use those results to figure out other things in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. If we were going to be discussing something very specific, policy related, that we're kind of having as a notice open meeting.
Yes, right.
Right, I think discussing things in concepts, you know, the board development tool is designed to help us think about how we as a board are meeting all of the expectations of school boards in Wisconsin. And so I think, you know, as we're talking about part of that, I think the concept of how do we get community input, right? How do we do that? I think talking about those things in broad strokes could come up, but I don't think any place where we'd be digging into policy should be delayed until but we may decide, hey, this needs to go on a future agenda because we as the board think revisiting the policy needs to go on the agenda. Does that make sense? Thank you. That answers your question.
I think the broad envelope of the questions in the tool give a pretty good outline of what is germane to a board retreat, right? So how we interact with each other, how we interact with the administration, how we interact with the public, how we interact with state standards in the broad sense.
And for full disclosure, it will be a publicly posted meeting. The agenda will be, at this point, limited to just the board self-evaluation. If there was the need for additional agenda items, we would need to provide public notice. So anybody concerned with that, they'll be able to see the posting and see exactly what the board will be doing that evening. And just to clarify, we are planning on having a report put together for the survey. Do you want any outside entity, WASB, or, we met Bruce Quinton at the regional convention. Would you like anybody there to facilitate that discussion, or would you like to have it just as the board?
My inclination is to have this be just as the board. And I think based on looking at those results, we might say, hey, maybe we do want a consultant to come in on a certain topic or for a certain thing. But I think my gut is to start out this, looking at this just together.
I would agree, and I think you Rachel is right. Still take piece that piece anyway.
I think that sounds very reasonable.
Everyone feel good about that? Wonderful, thank you. Here we are, items related to next meeting date, board committees and reports. November 13th, Smart Girls Rock, 8 o'clock at the middle school. That's this coming Wednesday morning. As I think we all know, November 25th through 29th, there will be no school for students and staff. We won't be having a special board meeting this month. December 2nd, QIC meets here at 3:50. Our regular school board meeting is December 9th. Now we know on December 16th, we'll be having our board retreat. And no school December 23rd through 31st. And no special board meeting in December. All right, any questions about items related to next meeting dates?
Rachel, just if any of the board members attending the school board convention, if you want to be signed up for any of the receptions or anything like that, please get that information to Jenny right away so that she can make sure she reserves your spot. I would say by the end of the week, if we don't hear anything, we will not be reserving any additional reservations.
Great. And we'll entertain a motion to adjourn. So, thank you. Let's adjourn.